handful of salt once helped bring an empire to its knees. Not gold, not oil, not diamonds, salt. The same white crystals sitting on your kitchen table right now. You can buy a year's supply for a few dollars. Nobody guards it. Nobody fights wars over it. And most people never think about it. But for thousands of years, salt was one of the most valuable substances on Earth. People smuggled it. People killed for it. Governments taxed it. Empires built roads just to move it. One salt tax helped fuel a revolution, and one man used salt to challenge the most powerful empire on the planet. The strangest part? None of this happened because people wanted better-tasting food. The real reason salt became so powerful is something most people never realize. And once you understand it, human history starts to look very different. To see why, we need to go back to a world without refrigerators. Why salt changed everything. Imagine you're living thousands of years ago. You hunt an animal or harvest food for your family. That's good news. But now the clock starts ticking. There are no refrigerators, no freezers, no canned food, no preservatives, nothing. Within days, your food can spoil. And spoiled food isn't just unpleasant. It can kill you. For most of human history, this was one of humanity's biggest problems. Then came salt, and everything changed. Salt pulls moisture out of food. Without moisture, bacteria struggle to survive. Suddenly, food that might last only a few days could last weeks, sometimes even months. That changed everything. People could survive long winters, travel farther than ever before, store food for emergencies, support larger populations, build larger settlements. Salt didn't just preserve food, it helped preserve civilizations, and that's when salt became something far more important than seasoning. It became power, because whenever something becomes essential for survival, people start competing to control it. And very quickly, salt became one of the most valuable trade goods in the ancient world. In some regions of West Africa, blocks of salt were traded weight for weight with gold. Think about that. Gold, the metal that launched expeditions, built kingdoms, created fortunes. Yet there were times when people valued salt just as highly, not because it tasted good, because it kept people alive. Whoever controlled salt controlled food, and whoever controlled food controlled power. No one understood that better than the Rome's salt empire. When people think of ancient Rome, they usually think of gladiators, massive armies, colossal buildings, conquering continents. But behind all of that was something surprisingly simple: salt. The Roman Empire depended on it. Millions of people needed food. Huge armies needed supplies, and food had to survive long journeys. Without salt, that becomes a serious problem. As demand grew, Rome built trade routes specifically to transport it. One of the most famous roads was called the Via Salaria, the Salt Road. Think about that for a moment. Rome built a major highway for salt. Not gold, not silver, salt. That's how important it was. Its influence became so deep that traces of it still exist today. The word salary comes from the Latin word salarium. Historians debate exactly how the connection developed, but the fact that money and salt became linked tells us something important. Salt was incredibly valuable. Even the phrase "worth your salt" comes from this ancient obsession. Thousands of years later, we still use expressions shaped by a mineral most people barely notice. But Rome's obsession with salt was nothing compared to what happened in France. Because centuries later, salt would become one of the most hated symbols of government power in Europe. And eventually, it would help push a nation toward revolution. The tax everyone hated. Imagine being forced by law to buy a product every year. You don't choose the price. The government does. You don't choose the supplier. The government does. And if you try to avoid it, you could end up in prison. That was reality in France. The tax was called the gabelle, and it became one of the most hated taxes in French history. The French government controlled salt production and heavily taxed it. To make matters worse, some privileged groups received exemptions. Ordinary people did not. So while the wealthy often avoided the burden, everyone else paid the price. Year after year, the frustration grew. Salt prices climbed higher. Smuggling exploded. People secretly transported illegal salt across the country. Others risked arrest just to avoid paying the tax. Thousands were caught. Many faced harsh punishment, all because of salt. Think about how strange that sounds today, being arrested over seasoning. Yet that's exactly what happened. Over time, the salt tax became a symbol of something much bigger: government control, economic inequality, special treatment for the powerful, and growing anger among ordinary citizens. So when the French Revolution finally erupted in 1789, the gabelle was already deeply despised. Salt didn't cause the revolution by itself. History is rarely that simple. But it became one more reason people lost faith in the system. One mineral, one tax, years of resentment, and eventually revolution. But the most famous salt protest in history was still decades away, and it would involve no weapons at all. The handful of salt that shook an empire. By the early 1900s, Britain controlled much of India, and among its many laws was one that seemed surprisingly small, the Salt Laws. In 1882, the British Salt Act restricted Indians from collecting or selling their own salt. Instead, they had to buy heavily taxed salt controlled by the colonial government. To millions of Indians, it felt deeply unfair. The salt came from Indian land, Indian coastlines, Indian seawater. Yet people were expected to pay the British for access to it. Many accepted the situation because challenging an empire seemed impossible. One man saw things differently. His name was Mahatma Gandhi, and in 1930 he launched a protest unlike anything the world expected. He didn't raise an army. He didn't call for violence. He started walking. Gandhi announced a march to the Arabian Sea. At first it seemed simple, almost insignificant. But as the days passed, something remarkable happened. The march kept growing. Villagers joined. Supporters joined. Journalists followed every step. The world began paying attention. For 24 days, Gandhi and his followers walked hundreds of miles. Then, on April 6, 1930, they reached the coast. Gandhi bent down, picked up a handful of salt, and broke the law. That was it. No battle, no weapons, no attack, just a handful of salt. British officials initially dismissed the protest. Many believed it would achieve nothing. They were wrong. The act inspired thousands of people across India to challenge the salt laws themselves. The government responded with mass arrests. Gandhi was imprisoned. More than 60,000 supporters were arrested. But by then the damage was done. The world was watching, and the image was impossible to ignore. The most powerful empire on earth was arresting people for collecting salt from their own shores. It became a public relations disaster. India would not gain independence for several more years. But the Salt March became one of the defining moments of the independence movement. A simple mineral had become a symbol of freedom. And once again, salt had changed history. The next time someone passes you the salt at dinner, take a second to think about what you're holding. For thousands of years, people crossed deserts for it. Traders built fortunes from it. Empires built roads for it. Governments taxed it. Smugglers risked prison for it. Revolutionaries protested because of it, and one of the most famous acts of civil disobedience in history began with a handful of it on a beach. Today, salt feels ordinary, cheap, common, almost invisible. But hidden inside that small white shaker is one of the most extraordinary stories in human history. A substance so ordinary that most people ignore it, yet powerful enough to influence economies, governments, revolutions, and empires. History is full of stories like this. The biggest events are often connected to the smallest things. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more surprising stories hidden inside everyday objects. And tell me in the comments, what ordinary item do you think has the most unbelievable history? Because if salt can do all of this, imagine what other stories are hiding in plain sight.